can't even begin to tell you how much I struggled over this video. I've been working on this for years. This video about one of the most infamous autism stereotyped characters in the world, a character who is both loved and hated for succeeding and failing to represent autism, and who isn't even supposed to be autistic. Sheldon Cooper, theoretical physicist, boy genius, eidetic memory haver, an exceptionally arrogant man, absolutely obsessed with eugenics, misogynistic, racist, and one of the most beloved sitcom characters of all time. So what's his deal? And is he autistic or not?
You're insane. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. You're out of your mind. I'm not crazy. You're talking like a crazy person. My mother had me tested. 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 My mother had me tested.
Although I do regret not following up with that specialist in Houston.
It might come as a surprise to younger members of the audience, but there was a time when media based off comic books, graphic novels, sci-fi, and fantasy fictions were not fucking everywhere all of the time. If you go back to the early 90s, we did get movies based on geeky titles, but they were never a guaranteed success and were often released straight to video or TV, receiving mixed reviews. Many of these films would later get remade, shedding their cult following for mass appeal. But by the mid-2000s, we were getting 5 or 6 box office smashes per year based on comic books, graphic novels, sci-fi, or fantasy. Think the Star Wars prequels, Lord of the Rings, Spider-Man, Harry Potter. Phantom Menace came out in 1999 and became the second highest grossing film at that time. In 2001, The Fellowship of the Ring became the 5th highest grossing. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone also became the 2nd highest grossing in 2001. Spider-Man was the first movie to make $100 million in the first weekend in 2002. And if you look at the list of highest grossing movies as of today, a majority of them are either sci-fi, fantasy, or superhero films. There are 3 Avengers movies in the top 50 highest grossing films of all time right now.
It's like 1977. I haven't felt this since 1977.
Prior to nerdy shit breaking containment in the late 90s, it was a lonely thing being a nerd. It was much harder to find like-minded people or get your hands on the games, movies, and merch that are so easily ordered online today. You had to spend your hard-earned weekends trawling around various shops in order to find anything that was considered alternative. It was a commitment, a lifestyle choice, and it was one that absolutely pegged you as a bit weird. I was the only one out of my group of friends at school who watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer every week and who was obsessed with Tim Burton's Batman, and it took me years to find fellow geeks to hang out with. If I'm going to be totes honest with you, I welcomed the explosion of geek culture. I didn't like feeling weird for liking the stuff that I liked. Of course, now capitalism has ruined everything. I never thought I'd see the day where I just roll my eyes at a new release from a franchise I loved, but rolling right out of my head. Studio executives and production companies were greedily eyeing up those early successes and constantly trying to find more and more revenue streams, endless prequels and sequels. So, while Marvel was plotting its cinematic universe, Chuck Lorre, Bill Prady, and Warner Brothers Entertainment were ready to take full advantage of the previously niche.
A show like The Big Bang Theory is not supposed to be a mainstream success, not when the 2 lead characters are a theoretical physicist and an experimental physicist, or when episodes involve the Born-Oppenheimer approximation and Schrödinger's cat. It's just not.
Except it was. Of course it was. It would be the perfect vehicle to cram all things geeky, just full, to appeal to both those audiences who were fueling the success of these fantasy and sci-fi titles, but also those audiences who didn't really understand all that, didn't really get the references, but who sure like to laugh at people who do.
There's this really interesting serendipity that happens with regard to certain television shows coming along at the right time and in the right place. Big Bang was sort of right at the moment when conversations about geeks, nerds, scientists were happening, particularly as superhero comic book inspired movies were becoming more mainstream. You had the magic of Kaylee in the cast. Her addition to the cast was the secret alchemy.
Penny, she's the person we identify with who is watching the geeks with amused skepticism.
If we could put her in the world of these physicists, she would be the audience. She would be us. They'd have to explain to her, thus explaining to us, the audience, what the hell is going on.
But The Big Bang Theory was not an immediate hit. In fact, the first pilot got rejected, but they were allowed a second shot. Something which is not common, and I suspect probably had something to do with the studio having eyes on the billions of dollars being raked in by geeky titles. Season 1 of The Big Bang Theory was met with mixed reviews. It only ranked at 68 on the ratings list. It was so bad that a lot of the people working on the show were skeptical as to whether it would get more seasons after season 2. Maybe those initial assumptions were right. Mainstream audiences didn't want to watch a show about a bunch of scientists talking about science and fantasy and other things that most people neither care nor know about. And there was skepticism from the geeks too, who were wary of a show that seemed prime to make fun of them. As cast member Will Wheaton put it,
I was actually really against the show when I first heard about it. I thought it was going to be making fun of people like me, lifelong nerds. Whenever somebody in entertainment wants to do something about our culture, odds are the nerds are going to be the butt of the joke.
and you might hear that and think, but aren't they? I certainly did when I read that quote. If Penny is the audience insert character and she's watching the geeks with amused skepticism, then isn't the source of said amusement the aforementioned the geeks? Are we not also supposed to be watching them with amused skepticism? And like, at least in the first few seasons, these are not likable characters. Howard, misogynistic creep of a man who engages in outright criminal behaviour towards women, harassing and objectifying them.
Howard was a little tricky to make human. There definitely was a layer of sleaze that was oozing off of him, but I also felt like he certainly was the butt of the joke at the same time. I felt like it was actually making fun of him. He was an offensive and inappropriate person, so I was personally pleased that he became more of a respectable human as the series progressed.
Raj, an entitled rich kid who sees nothing wrong with having servants or speaking disparagingly about his own country of India, and who is also pretty misogynistic. Leonard, whose main personality trait seems to be frowning, a man who enables the terrible attitudes of his friends, who is much too much of a nice guy to push back effectively, despite the fact that he does seem to hate them, and who objectifies Penny, pushing boundaries and emotionally manipulating her. And Sheldon,
A character who believed he was always right, so pity on everyone else who orbited the world around him.
People like Sheldon can be difficult to get to know. They can be off-putting or frustrating at times.
A lot of people said that seeing someone like Sheldon find and receive love was something they never imagined.
Sheldon is unreasonable, stunningly arrogant and self-centered. He believes his genes are a gift to humanity and that he is always absolutely the smartest person in any room. He hurts the feelings of those around him and seemingly does not care, and he is also incredibly misogynistic. Old school misogynistic too. Like, women are biologically inferior misogynistic. You would be forgiven for thinking that these are the obvious butts of obvious jokes, that Penny does represent the audience, and that it was entirely written with this framework in mind. And then it kind of flopped. But then something happened which was entirely unexpected by everyone involved. On Friday the 25th of July 2008 at 10:15 a.m., The Big Bang Theory made its debut at Comic-Con in San Diego.
I said, nobody's going to show up, man. This is going to be a disaster. We should just get on the next train and turn around. I was like, this is going to be a mess. And we tried to get out of it on the train while we were on the way there, but we couldn't.
I thought going to Comic-Con was a horrible idea. Like, I thought there would be 11 people in an auditorium, and it would be horribly embarrassing.
But when they arrived, the cast soon learned that people had camped out overnight in a long line for their panel. 3,000 fans awaited the Big Bang Theory gang.
They went berserk. It was like the Beatles. It was staggering, right, that those 17 episodes meant so much to so many people. I was always obsessed with our ratings because I was in a continual state of fear that we'd get canceled. It went away after Comic-Con.
People were dressed like us and grabbing us. Comic-Con was a watershed moment, and so was our press trip to Mexico City, which was a similar thing, only in Spanish. We were on the cover of the newspaper the next day with the words El Nerdos.
It wasn't the mainstream audiences who related to Penny who ensured the show's success. It was El Nerdos. Wait, wouldn't it be Los Nerdos? Spanish speakers. Let me know. It was the kinds of people who go to Comic-Con who celebrated this bunch of imperfect and problematic, yes, but also vulnerable, ostracized, bullied, and anxious, geeky boys. It was the ones who understood the physics references and who appreciated them, surface level though they were. It was the ones who saw themselves in these admittedly rather cartoonish characters. The ones who laughed at the jokes that they made rather than laughing at them for finding that funny at all. It wasn't the Pennies of the world that ensured the show's success. It was the Sheldons. It was me. I didn't go to Comic-Con, but when the Big Bang Theory first came out, I kinda liked it. I was like 20 years old, a geek, the kind of person who spends her weekends at home playing Star Wars Trivial Pursuit and Oblivion. A person who struggled to make friends and socialise, who didn't really understand the things that the Pennies of the world liked, but who really enjoyed discussing the ins and outs of the movies and TV shows and games that I liked. I much preferred an evening of takeaways and Halo to drinking and dancing. And I enjoyed the fact that there was a show where I actually understood the references and where I could laugh at the dizzy blonde who doesn't know what the Doppler effect is. Could you imagine? I felt smug when I knew about the scientific theory before they explained it to Penny. Like when you get a question right on University Challenge. Do you know, I needed all the confidence I could get. Obviously, the characters were cartoonish and unrealistic, stereotypes of a kind of guy. But it was a kind of guy I knew. And it was a kind of guy that I would have felt more comfortable communicating with than the usual kinds of guy that were depicted on sitcoms at that time. The top sitcom of that era was 2.5 Men, for crying out loud.
I love women, even if there's no possibility of having sex with them. What?
Another Chuck Lorre classic. And watching a bunch of people who seemingly hate each other just hanging out all day, well, that's just sitcoms, innit? Of course, we were way too forgiving in the mid 2000s. And like what with social media being kind of new at that time, as Jessica Radloff, author of this behind the scenes tome that I've been quoting through this whole video, said,
In 2010, writers' rooms weren't under the necessary scrutiny that they are today.
and when your alternative to trashy sitcoms was like shows that had the sole purpose of making you hate yourself and others for not being a size 0 or like aging in reverse.
These fatties haven't seen their feet for years.
Mr. and Mrs. Massive Fatty.
Viv Thomas looked so clapped out, even her nearest and dearest couldn't quite believe it. All it took was an upper eyelid reduction, brow lift, eye bag removal, full facelift, nose job and a chemical peel to turn her ancient, sagging face into a thing of beauty.
2 cheddar cheese sandwiches, 2 chicken fajitas, a Chinese takeaway, an Indian takeaway with chicken korma, 6 turkey burgers and 9 bags of crisps.
It's absolutely disgusting, Fiona. I am sickened by this.
Or reality programs aimed at creating a sense of fear and disgust of working class people, or documentaries that showcase anyone living any kind of alternative lifestyle as a freak of nature, or sport, which was for boys. Not like I would have liked it if I was a boy, who are we kidding? But you get what I'm saying, it wasn't the worst thing on TV. And you didn't binge watch TV back then either. You got like 1 episode a week, all like mixed in with whatever else the channel gods had deigned to show you. Like, we didn't even have a Freeview box in our house. We had 4 channels and The Big Bang Theory was on one of them. In my defense, I never once claimed to have good taste. It still surprised me to learn that, though, about the Comic-Con and about how it was like geeks who were really into the show in the beginning. Because, like, for me, it was always just fine. Like, I never owned a DVD or anything. I just liked feeling smug. It's not like I was gonna, like, dress up like any of the characters or anything. I am aware of the irony, but my feelings on the show changed quite dramatically as I grew older and as I realised that it's not just the endless references to Star Wars and science and philosophy that I was relating to, but it was Sheldon. I realised that I was on the side of the last person I should be. Penny is the audience. The geeks are the ones the audience are laughing at. But Sheldon is the one who everyone laughs at. I always kind of felt like most of the conflict in the show could have been avoided if the other characters simply learned how to communicate with Sheldon. If they would just communicate with him in the way that, to me, you would obviously need to communicate with him. In the way that I would communicate with him. In the way that I often wished people would communicate with me. And I realised that I wouldn't be so put off by Sheldon as all the characters in the show seem to be. Like, if he wasn't so misogynistic and obsessed with eugenics and things, like, I would enjoy having a person like that in my life, even without the make-believe memory skills. The fact that I was relating most with the character who we are clearly not supposed to be relating with, well, that gave me pause for thought. And the thought was, maybe I'm autistic. That inaugural Big Bang Theory Comic-Con panel not only bolstered the confidence of the showrunners, but it gave fans the opportunity to ask an important question. Because it turns out that there were lots of people out there having the same thoughts I did. Moderator Adam Savage from Mythbusters took the opportunity to ask whether the character was based on someone with Asperger's syndrome. Jim Parsons, who plays Sheldon, answered,
I don't know that it's informed it. I've played a couple of different characters in life that can be strung together with sort of the Asperger's syndrome symptoms. A lot of it is that sort of naivete and sort of not knowing what to say. not knowing what would be appropriate. We've talked about it. I asked. I had heard of it, and I didn't really know anything at all.
But the response he got was,
"This is the way he is." I got to reading Look Me in the Eye and said, "You should read this. It's Sheldon's biography."
and Jessica Radloff posed the question again while interviewing for her book.
We did not want to put a label on Sheldon because with that comes a responsibility of authenticity, which should be respected. Our solution was the line, "I'm not crazy, my mother had me tested." And that put it to rest. Mary took Sheldon to a general practitioner in East Texas in 1990 who said, "Oh, he's fine. He's peculiar, but he's fine." I think not having a label gave Jim a great deal more freedom to play the part as he wanted to play it, as opposed to how he might have been pressured to do for a very real syndrome that can be difficult.
Sheldon was never diagnosed, and it was nice that he didn't have that label because, like anybody on the spectrum, they should be able to be who they are.
I really took it as the writers wanting to celebrate and utilize certain aspects of someone on the spectrum, but were not interested in carrying the responsibility they would feel. But looking at where we are today in the world, would you have needed to then find somebody on the spectrum to play that part? Now, that being said, who's to say I'm not on the spectrum in some way? I'm not saying I am, but it's called a spectrum for a reason.
That's not how the spectrum works, Jim. We're not all on it. Although, having watched several interviews with Jim Parsons and having listened to his experiences and processes, who is to say he's not on it? Certainly not me. I'm not saying he is. People get mad at me when I do that. But, you know, vibes are present.
I could say with honesty that Jim Parsons is quite close to Sheldon. Hey.
The writers might not have wanted the responsibility of authenticity or sensitivity, but then why did they write an autistic character? Because they definitely wrote an autistic character.
But at the time, the more I read up on Asperger's, I was like, well, the writers can say no, but Sheldon sure has a lot of the same traits.
To his great credit, Jim Parsons, who plays Sheldon, said in 2008 that his character couldn't display more facets of autism. But presumably that interview was followed by a swift bonk on the nose, as the franchise has remained silent on Sheldon's autism since. The show's writers have said that Sheldon's character was not conceived of as autistic. A lot of people see various things in him and make the connections. Bill Prady, co-creator of The Big Bang Theory, said in 2009.
But the character was based on a probably autistic man that one of the writers knew in real life.
I think he was probably based on someone Bill Prady knew, who probably was on the spectrum. And many of the traits that this other individual had made them such a remarkable and unique person to base a character on.
You probably watch Chuck Lorre's sitcom and think that nobody could possibly act like any of the outlandishly nerdy characters in real life. Well, think again. According to Laurie himself, both Sheldon Cooper and Raj Kuthrapali were inspired by one guy Prady knew decades before he ever created the duo. In a 2022 chat with Entertainment Weekly, interviewer Keith Langston asked how the show's creative team decided to give Raj selective mutism. Bill worked with a guy in the 1980s, a computer programmer, that was actually like that, and that attribute actually belonged to the fellow who had most of Sheldon's attributes as well. Somehow, in our discussions, the selective mutism moved out of the Sheldon character and into Raj.
Bill was telling me about his computer programming days back in the 80s and these wonderful characters that he worked with who were beyond brilliant but entirely inept in the real world. They could figure out pi to 80 decimal points but couldn't figure out a tip in a restaurant because there was too many variables. And I recall saying, well, that's the show.
He was a mathematical savant. He also had selective mutism around women. We broke those two qualities off between Sheldon and Raj because, although it was based on an actual person, it would have seemed unbelievable on a show at the time, even though this person really did suffer that way. Now we look at these things and have a better understanding of people who are neuroatypical and who process the world differently. But at the time, he was just that dude. And he did that stuff.
So he wasn't conceived of as autistic, but he was based on a probably autistic, definitely neurodivergent man. Except he's not autistic, except of course he is. As Jim Parsons says, he could hardly display any more traits of autism. And the people around the show do love to describe him as spectrumy. Spectrumy. Except we wouldn't want to label him, because that would restrict the character and mean that we have to be responsible, which obviously we do not want to be. But also we're fine with labelling Raj's selective mutism, or Leonard's lactose intolerance and asthma, or Howard's peanut allergy, even though we don't really bother depicting those things realistically either. But this is all just what was he said? Oh yeah, the fans seeing various things and making connections.
We preferred Sheldon was just Sheldon. There were some things about him that would seem spectrumy.
He's just Sheldon, and he's somewhat spectrumy, although we were careful to never identify him with that. When Mayim came in for the audition, Chuck said, we're looking for a female version of Sheldon.
The original way I presented Amy was much more consistent with certain spectrumy features.
Sheldon was definitely on the spectrum, there's no question about it.
Oh, isn't there, Peter? Isn't there? Sheldon Cooper is an autistic character. If you literally armchair assessed him, like you went and found all the screening questionnaires and tests and everything, and answered them as if you were him, you would be armchair diagnosing him within the hour. He's getting full marks. He's ticking every box. You don't even need to tick every box to get a diagnosis. Just as the geeks on this show are geeky in every way it's possible to be geeky, like extreme, absurd levels of geeky, Sheldon is autistic in just about all the ways that a theoretical physicist could be autistic, which is a lot of ways. So you don't get diagnosed with autism unless you are disabled, and Sheldon Cooper certainly is disabled. Like, they might have removed the selective mutism because obviously that would be too much to believe. But we see him shut down and become unable to communicate effectively multiple times. He needs very direct help with daily tasks like getting to work and appointments. He misses social cues to the point where he gets taken advantage of and scammed. His need for consistency is consistent. At times of big change, we see him completely melt down, even have full-on mental health crises in which his mother needs to literally come and sit by his bedside and make sure he does the things that he needs to do to stay alive. When he's forced to take vacation from work, he's completely lost, unable to function without his familiar structure and routine. He has multiple sensory issues which he accommodates by changing his behaviors and environment, avoiding situations and foods and clothes. He is bullied and made fun of by almost everybody around him and often doesn't seem to realize. He is autistic. Chuck Lorre said that Comic-Con where he realized for the first time what these characters actually meant to real people out there, that this changed his attitude towards the show.
I realized the show was touching people on a much deeper emotional level than I could have possibly anticipated. Big Bang spoke to a deeper issue, which is, on the simplest level, loneliness and feeling left out. It promised community. 2.5 Men was pretty much about jokes. It was misogynistic nonsense, but here we were inexplicably stumbling into a show that was about something.
If The Big Bang Theory started life as a somewhat lazy attempt to cash in on and make fun of the kinds of people who are willing to spend their hard-earned money on Star Wars merch, it soon turned into a rather self-congratulatory and allegedly earnest attempt to celebrate those who are different. I'll be the judge of that.
My wife and I have an autistic daughter, and while Sheldon is very different from her, I've certainly found myself drawn to him, rooting for him, and loving him. The special needs of the character is something that enabled me to relate to and, or more importantly, to root for.
I remember thinking that it was cool that we had a character who was clearly on the spectrum. We weren't saying it, but we were kind of celebrating it and him and making it okay to be different.
I can't tell you how many times a parent would bring their son or daughter to set and say, "I'd love for you to meet him," followed by, almost as a warning, "He's a lot like Sheldon." I would say, "Yeah, we get it. It's fine, really. We understand."
I never liked the word nerd or nerd comedy because I saw them as brilliant people who were feeling left out, feeling disenfranchised and alienated from the culture many people take for granted.
It was so comforting, even inspiring, to know it's okay to be different, to be outside the mainstream, and yet still be accepted and loved and have a place in the world. And that's what it's all about for Sheldon and for me. He's an exaggerated version of us who don't see ourselves as the popular one, the social one, the one who is comfortable in a lot of situations with people around.
I strongly disagree with the decision to utilize aspects of autism but to never name it. And I don't believe that it was this purely creative decision designed to give Jim Parsons more freedom, especially seeing as he ended up reading up on autism to prepare for the character anyway.
I completely understand that people were frustrated when he wasn't referred to as being identified on the spectrum, but Sheldon was never meant to be a spokesperson for a group of people, which is why we tried to keep labels off him.
Wasn't referred to as being identified as on the spectrum. Just say autistic, I'm literally begging you.
Sheldon was the kind of character I enjoyed, which was borderline idiot savant.
No. Jim, no. What is wrong with saying autistic? Oh, wait, yeah, right, because it's a label. Idiot savant, that's not a label. Spectrumy, that's not a label, but autistic. Well, if we called him autistic, then that would narrow the scope of the character, and then he'd have to be a spokesperson for a group of people, obviously. But that is just a massive bunch of bollocks, though, innit? Again, Leonard isn't supposed to be a spokesperson for people with asthma or lactose intolerance or anxiety or deep psychological issues from a childhood of being experimented on and having no affection. Raj wasn't considered a spokesman for those with selective mutism or, like immigrants of colour. Howard wasn't supposed to be speaking for the Jewish community or those allergic to nuts. There were plenty of characters with named, marginalised identities or disabilities who were never supposed to be or expected to be spokespeople of any kind. And the idea that an autistic character would need to be a spokesperson for the community, would need to unproblematically represent all of us, well, that's ableism in itself. Do we only get to be seen when it's time to do autism advocacy? Can we only acknowledge that we exist if it's for the specific purpose of representation? And why would it narrow the scope of the character anyway? Are you saying that autistic people have less to them? That we're less interesting? That all we get to do is be autistic? They never say the word autism. It's like the Big Bang Theory exists in a world in which autism does not. And Sheldon isn't the only autistic coded character on the show who is also thought of as a massive weirdo by everyone else. Beverly, Bert, Amy, especially in the early episodes. Autism isn't a label. It's a neurotype, which manifests as a way of experiencing and operating within the world, the way that Sheldon does. Like, obviously, he's not a realistic character, but none of these characters are realistic humans. They're all over the top. But when I read through all these reasons for refusing to call a clearly autistic character autistic, I smell fear. It feels like they knew. They knew that he was going to be the butt of most jokes. and they knew that his autistic traits especially would be reason to laugh at him. And they also knew that autistic people are a population who are bullied, abused, and harmed at significantly higher rates than the average person. And I just think they didn't want to sit with that. I think the show that The Big Bang Theory was intended to be is one that is based entirely on punching down. And they could get away with punching down because the audience insert character is a young working class woman, and these are middle class white men and one extremely wealthy Indian man. They held stable, well paid jobs while she was waitressing, living off tips, and scrounging food from her neighbours. The power imbalance was actually in their favour, so in this context, is it really punching down? Yes, it is. Because while Penny might be the audience isn't Penny. The audience includes people who treat the neurodivergent people in their lives like shit, who bullied that kid at school and who dismisses that colleague at work, and who are only watching the show for more reasons to laugh and roll their eyes at clearly neurodivergent people. We've established, I think, he's autistic. And so, let's ask. Were they right to fear us? A lot of people call Sheldon one-dimensional, and I can't agree. I feel the same way about that as I feel when people say it about The Good Doctor. Like, I feel like you didn't watch the show. There are multiple episodes dedicated to Sheldon learning some kind of lesson, changing his ways, going through some kind of hurdle to come out the other side slightly different. The whole final season is basically that. His entire relationship with Amy is a story of his personal growth. We see him go from a complete recluse living in a bare apartment sitting on lawn furniture to someone who spends the most important moment of his life thanking his many friends and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Is that Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
He goes from someone who can't bear physical touch and has no interest in romantic relationships to married with kids. Just because a character is annoying and stereotypical and repetitive, that doesn't make them one-dimensional. So, while we're apparently in the vein of defending Sheldon, let's talk about what I liked about him. He's a good friend. Hear me out. Like, they're all horrible to one another. They all make fun of each other. They all play tricks on each other and gossip about each other behind their backs. But, like, when it comes to actually being there for people, Sheldon is. He saved all of their lives when Leonard almost blew up the apartment. When Penny fell in the shower, he overcomes his fear of driving to take her to the hospital and looks after her the whole episode. When Penny decides to start a business making hair clips, he drops everything to help her. And when she doesn't have rent money, he offers her as much as she needs, no questions asked, pay it back whenever you can. And he sets up a scholarship fund for Howard and Bernadette's kids. That's pretty decent friend stuff, if you ask me. He's honest. I mean, yeah, it might be uncomfortable, but it's not as uncomfortable as knowing your friend is a liar. And I do see myself in parts of the character. The fact that he expects people to be grateful when he corrects them. That was me when I was young. I mean, why wouldn't you be pleased to learn something new and be saved from further embarrassing mistakes? And we all love an info dump, don't we? And that's basically why I do this job. I can scratch that itch, but my audience have chosen to be there. It's excellent. There were parts of his and Amy's relationship that I quite liked. I liked to see a couple who were taking it slow and taking time to learn about each other's desires and not feeling a need to like pretend for one another. The fact that they were by far the healthiest and least toxic couple on that show, that was kind of cool. And in the end, they were celebrated, like literally, as Nobel Prize winners. Look, just even seeing a character who wasn't striving after sex 24/7 for mid 2000s TV, that was different.
And they had not been on television. I'd certainly never seen it. Television was always get the girl, get the guy, I'm lonely, I need someone, sex is going to make me feel better, I want to be in love, etc., etc. But Sheldon was complete without a relationship, and that broke ground a little bit.
I always thought that Sheldon and Penny's relationship was the most interesting one to watch. And you didn't get many platonic male female relationships on TV back then either. Like, where there's absolutely no will they, won't they, or like unrequited attraction, you know? Penny took a big sister role in Sheldon's life pretty quickly, and I liked that she seemed to genuinely find joy in getting to know someone so very different from herself. She learned to be curious and supportive, which often annoyed Leonard, but I don't know, that's got to be a more responsible use of the audience insert character than just eye rolling and impatience as we saw in the first couple of series. And I enjoyed how Sheldon and Amy developed their own little neurodivergent bubble. Their love for one another shielded them from all the snark and jokes at their expense. They had their own thing going on, had a lot of fun together, and revelled in each other's special interests. Even if they were being made fun of by the other characters, by the audience, they didn't seem to care because they had each other. And I think there's a nice lesson in there for the autistic people watching. Find your people. In many ways, is living the autistic dream, you know? I do like to see characters who aren't afraid of their passions, who will dive fully into that which is usually considered cringe. But Sheldon has shaped his environment to suit him, albeit in a rather extreme and unrealistic way. The roommate agreement is painted as a way for Sheldon to manipulate and wield power, but it's also a way for Sheldon to know what to expect from different situations. A rule for everything makes him more comfortable. There are no unpleasant surprises, no sudden changes. Predictable equals safe. Getting a job which accommodates you, which you enjoy, a home full of the things that you love, a set of rules to live your life by, a routine that is crafted by you and not by external pressures or employers, the ability to opt out of that which is difficult, like cooking. Sounds bloody lovely, doesn't it? Sounds like heaven. Sounds like the kind of thing I'm trying to achieve, to be honest. And Sheldon has people who love him. They might be mean to him, roll their eyes at him. They might never really understand him, but they do love him. They do drive him to work. His mother does drop everything to be at his bedside. Oh, I feel like in making the list of stuff that I like, I'm having to ignore a lot. Like, first, his friends and family aren't supporting his needs because they believe them to be needs. They're doing it because he's a genius who's going to revolutionize physics and change the world. Pandering to him now will bring rewards later on when you finally get to share his spotlight. Remember, he's not crazy. There's nothing wrong with him. His mother had him tested. He doesn't really need any of it. In fact, while Sheldon does seem to struggle with driving early on, as many autistic people do, later on they make a joke about how he's basically just pretending to struggle because he likes people driving him around because it makes him feel important. And the situation that I describe as an autistic dream, that's the situation Sheldon is supposed to be moving away from. He's not supposed to be dependent on his support network. He's supposed to grow up, and he and Amy certainly were celebrated for their genius, for solving string theory or whatever. The theme of this show is that these guys who are in their late 20s in season 1, I think Sheldon's supposed to be like 28, 29, like they have PhDs and steady employment. They already have their lives somewhat together. The theme is that they will become less of a bunch of incelish nerds. They will grow up, dress better, get married, and have kids. I don't know if that's the celebration of the different that the writers want us to think it is. Except for Raj. Raj didn't get married or have kids. He did cure his selective mutism out of nowhere though, so yay for him! How did he do that? Well, those of you with communications-based disabilities in the audience will be interested, I'm sure to know, that there is actually a cure. Simply become too annoying to write.
There were times when we had written entire scenes and then remembered, wait, there's a girl in the room, Kuth can't talk, and we have to go back and figure out a way through that. It happened more than once. The selective mutism was a fun idea in the beginning, but I'm glad we were able to move on from it.
Utilizing disabilities is a fun idea until, of course, it gets annoying or you have to think things through. These characters were based on a real person. A person who didn't get to just turn off their communication disability when it gets frustrating. A person who probably wasn't exaggerating his struggles to manipulate people and feel important. Maybe that's what they really mean by narrowing the scope of the character. They wanted to be able to use disability to add interest, but drop it the second it gets a bit hard to write. The Big Bang Theory will not stand the test of time because it is built on lazy writing, stereotypes, and punching down, and just wielding various references and tropes and signifiers just emptily and without thought. You get a reference and you get a reference. Wisecrack as a video on the show and empty references and Baudrillard. Baudrillard? Baudrillard. But I'm not going to get into that. My point is, these are more caricatures than characters. They want to just allude to things. Like, they dropped like every sort of geeky reference you could basically think of, and like real people, real nerds, they're not like that. They don't just like every single thing because it falls into the genres that are usually considered geeky. People only have so many hours in a day. The scientific and philosophical theories that gave me that lovely little warm feeling of smugness. I mean, they're 101 type shit at best. At worst, they are pop science, which isn't even sound. There are heaps of incorrect or outdated statements made by these geniuses. There's a lot of real science too, but none of it is especially advanced. Any real physicist watching the show isn't going to be impressed. And like even Sheldon's sexuality, like, yeah, it was unusual to see an asexual character on the TV screen. And I appreciated it as somebody who is also on that particular spectrum. But when you listen to Chuck Lorre speaking about it becomes clear that they never really understood what it is. That's probably why they never named it, and why they saw it as an appropriate punchline.
While it was never formally mentioned in the series,
Again,
Lori believes Sheldon was asexual, meaning someone who does not experience sexual desire or attraction.
It's a biological imperative to couple up. It's how we're wired. But there are those amongst us who opt out. Sheldon was complete without a relationship. He was not unconsciously avoiding contact with people. He looked at it, he analyzed it, and said, I want no part of this. Science was his mistress. He wasn't driven by the culture. He made his own choice.
but sexuality isn't a choice. And Sheldon didn't analyze and avoid relationships. Half the time, he was almost forcing people to surround him. It was romance he wasn't interested in. I identify as demisexual, and I think Sheldon probably would too.
I as easily accepted his asexuality as I eventually did his odd sexuality once Amy was on.
No, Jim, no. We have a word for it. I mean, a label. We have a label. Odd sexuals sound off in the chat. Asexual people have not transcended. It just is what it is. It's not a choice, and it's not an avoidance of relationships entirely. I guess they were simply utilizing aspects of asexuality. It's just baiting. They're hinting at. They're including, but ambiguously. They're never stating it outright. How is it anything but baiting? To me, the Big Bang Theory is like the perfect manifestation of having your cake and eating it too. It's upheld by those it tears down. I think there's probably multiple reasons why the show seems confusing, but I largely attribute it to the tension between how it started life versus how it ended. The initial conception was one thing, and it was simple. We, Penny, laugh at the nerds. But then there was the unexpected reception from Comic Con adjacent fans. It was picked up for more seasons on more channels with a hugely increased reach. And with that came an increase in pressure. And there was changes to the writers' room and production team. And importantly, decreasing levels of involvement from Chuck Lorre.
If I kept running the show, we probably would have run out of gas. I know that because Malaro, Holland, the writers, took the show in directions I was terrified of and probably would not have had the courage to do so myself.
It really was when Malaro became more active as showrunner that we started seeing this development of the complexity of these characters. It was almost like a new show to explore all these different personalities.
We saw more women in the writers' room, on the production team, and of course on the cast. I don't doubt that they cared a lot for the characters and wanted to do something special with them, but they were working on flawed foundations. Can you please sit in frame? You coming in? No. You can sit over there. If they later named autism, that would reflect on the earlier seasons. While they certainly did do a lot to humanize the cartoonish, they couldn't do so much that it shines too bright a light on the flaws of the original writing. But they still act as if they were in this impossible situation regarding actually saying autism, and I just don't think that's the case. Sheldon could have been okay representation. First of all, there are autistic characters who are played by autistic actors who are generally well received by the community. Think Abed from Community or Samir from Mo. And as Jim Parsons said himself, who's to say he's not autistic? And secondly, autistic characters do not have to be perfect, unproblematic people. We can be rude and selfish and arrogant, and yes, actually, a bunch of us are weirdly obsessed with eugenics. I made a video about it. And we can also laugh at autism, it is allowed, so long as there is some thought put in. So long as we realise that that's what we're doing. We laugh at our bed being autistic in Community. There's jokes that would not land if he wasn't. And I'm not here to say that that's like a perfect show, but he's funny and autistic. He's funnily autistic and autistically funny. It's not offensive. It's not, did your mother have you tested for crazy? Offensive. Everyone isn't constantly rolling their eyes and trying to get away from our bed, making it so very obvious that they would prefer that he wasn't around. It's not always our bed that needs to learn how to change. In fact, often people are learning lessons from him. His way of seeing things is, while still funny, respected. Chuck Lorre and Bill Prady, who is autistic, by the way, they just thought it would be funny to put these socially inept and selectively mute savant characters on a show with a hot, dizzy blonde. Hilarity would surely ensue. Did you know that they originally wanted Amanda Walsh for the character, and the character of Penny was initially conceptualized as like a streetwise hard nut who was going to be like mean to them?
This is you!
But as Chuck said,
Despite Sheldon and Leonard's intelligence, they were like children, and you couldn't put a toxic character next to them like that. It broke your heart. And again, I was very much under the influence of 2.5 Men and thought that edgy humor would carry over to Big Bang. It did not. And I had a lot to learn because of that.
Chuck saw these characters, these 30-year-old dudes, doctors, with full time jobs and financial independence and stability, as like children, and he intended to go even harder on them than he ended up doing. But he didn't, because that made even him feel bad, and also his pilot got rejected. What made them like children? Was it the fact that they liked superheroes and comic books? And liked to dress up as them and hang around playing video games? Or these characters who those Comic-Con fans had related to so strongly were seen by the writers as needing to grow the fuck up and just be more normal. We were never supposed to be laughing at the jokes that Sheldon made. We were supposed to be laughing at him for trying to make them at all. Bazing! Sheldon saying science stuff is the joke. Nowhere was this supposed to be a celebration of the different. This was supposed to be a show where they punch down on the different until they're not so different anymore. And all the geeky references in the world won't change that. In the final episode, Sheldon's big realization is that he had been in the wrong the entire time, and that his friends deserved better.
Everyone is being incredibly selfish.
You would be the authority on the subject.
I have been encouraged, sustained, and tolerated. I apologize if I haven't been the friend you deserve.
They were all horrible friends. They were all terrible to each other. They all tricked and bullied each other. They all dismissed each other's needs and acted selfishly. But Sheldon was the one who had to change and apologize to his heroic friends, who had put up with him for all those years. They're like battle-worn veterans, scarred and bruised from being his friend.
A lot of people said that seeing someone like Sheldon find and receive love was something they never imagined for their child.
There are a few young people on the spectrum in my life, so I found myself hoping there might be a significant other out there for them one day. who has the kind of patience Amy displayed with Sheldon. People like Sheldon can be difficult to get to know. They can be off-putting or frustrating, usually unintentionally at times, but they also have a lot to offer.
Unintentional. In fact, it was firmly established in the final episode that Sheldon was completely unaware that he had been hurting the feelings of those around him.
You broke their hearts.
I didn't mean to.
I know. You never mean to. It's the only reason people tolerate you.
Unaware that he was difficult to be around, and that the series could finally conclude once he realized and apologized for failing to be the friend that these people deserved. These people.
We're running out of time.
Trick or treat. Are you familiar with the 12 labors of Hercules? By the way, the little marks that look like water spots, I tend to stand too close to the urinal, so... Hello! Saying fact, irritable comes from the Latin, susceptible to anger.
What are you all staring at? Have you ever seen a man try to get a meeting with Stephen Hawking before?
These people.
Your friends have been known to work late or sneak out to the movies or stay at a neurobiology conference 3 days after it's ended.
Raj, did you ever tell your sister about the time Sheldon got punched by Bill Gates? Bam! Right in the nose. Made me proud to own a PC.
You deliberately stuck me with Sheldon.
Betty, I'm hungry.
Good news, let's go.
Oh, Penny, take me with you to a rare and wonderful Sheldon-free evening. Here he is.
All you did was lie to me, destroy my dream, and humiliate me in front of the whole university.
None of that was unintentional. But it's also absurd to suggest that Sheldon was completely unaware that he is sometimes difficult to be around.
You're completely selfish human being and a physical and a moral coward.
His statements of the obvious continue to annoy.
It feels like a desperate attempt to quickly rehabilitate the character by blaming all of his past transgressions on Schrodinger's autism. They thought that they would get more series, but then Jim wanted to leave. But also, they had to keep people excited for Young Sheldon. And it can be the case that autistic people are sometimes unaware of how we're coming across. Or sometimes we're, perceived to be being rude when that's not our intent. But that's not like believing that women are like an egg salad sandwich on a hot Texas day, full of eggs and only appealing for a short time. Or that all women are slaves to their biological urges. That's not like plotting revenge against people or tricking them into painful or frightening situations.
Bazinga! I almost died!
It's not like stealing your friend's Bitcoin, but that last episode kind of waved away all of it as if he just didn't know any better. It's just a little baby, 40-year-old Nobel Prize winner. His behaviour is contextualised and excused through the lens of a disability that they refuse to name because they know that that's a shitty thing to do. You can have a flawed and selfish autistic character. You can even laugh at them. It's not impossible. Just don't keep calling them insane. Don't make autistic traits fair game for bullying and mockery. Don't make it seem like autistic people simply couldn't be aware that they're being absolutely terrible to everyone around them because, after all, they're like children. And maybe lay off the magical memory shit. Alright, so you might be wondering why I didn't mention Young Sheldon even though I did watch it for this video. It's honestly just because I didn't find it interesting enough to talk about. It's one of the most boring shows I've ever watched. There are no jokes. The storylines seem contrived, and honestly there just isn't much continuity between Big Bang Sheldon and Young Sheldon. They had the chance to kind of explain why he's like that, like why he's so closed-minded, mean, and kind of bigoted. Like, Big Bang makes out like he grew up in a tin-roofed shack in the middle of nowhere with an alcoholic, abusive dad and a mother who was only ever interested in church. And that would at least explain some things. But in Young Sheldon, like, yeah, sure, they're working class and basically just making ends meet, but they live in a nice sitcom home in what looks like a nice town. His relationships with his family and neighbours aren't as contentious as Big Bang made them seem. His dad might be a bit old-fashioned, but he's hardly abusive. Like, Young Sheldon is a pretty privileged kid. And there's all these episodes where he's apparently learning lessons about life, you know, like, for example, how there are different types of intelligence. So his sister scores really high on emotional intelligence, and the theme of the episode is Sheldon learning the lesson that other people can be clever too. A lesson I guess he forgot all about, even though he's not supposed to be able to forget things. And his intelligence is even more annoying in Young Sheldon because, like, this is a tiny child and yet has already read all the books. He already knows the entire physics program when he goes to university at the age of 11. Knows more about it, in fact, than the professors. But how? There's no way his parents can afford to buy him those books. Academic publications are expensive as oat. And you barely see him in the library. And, right, like, even if he's just constantly there between scenes, like, what kind of small East Texas library are we dealing with here that's got the entirety of cutting-edge theoretical physics publications? Even if he can speed read and magically remember everything he's ever read, I'm just not buying it. It's set in the 80s, and I don't like how they seem to use that as an excuse for the older characters to just make a bunch of racist and sexist jokes. There's an episode where Sheldon's Vietnamese friend comes over for dinner, which is unbearable. Young Sheldon was also based on a real person, by the way, Jim Parsons' nephew. So Judy Parsons, that's Jim's mom, she interviewed for the book that I read, and she described her grandson as a vessel for knowledge who just wants to know everything. And she said that so many times when he was growing up, I'd say, that sounds just like what Sheldon would say if Sheldon was little. Jim Parsons agreed and decided to get Chuck and Steve round to make the show. But Young Sheldon might be privileged, but people around him are also obviously annoyed at his presence. Like, when he walks into the room, people audibly groan. His parents will jump at any chance to not have to be the one to supervise him. His university professors and school teachers conspire to get rid of him. Like, his school teachers borderline hate him. I just hope that Michael doesn't take any of that to heart, you know? I wouldn't let Chuck Lorre base a character on my kid, put it that way.